Hello, thanks to anyone watching for joining us here right now. We're going to be ready to get going in just a little bit as soon as we have some people coming in. So I'm going to turn off the mic and so again, anyone to tuning in, we are just about to start the Citizen Assembly on this beautiful Sunday. It's raining here in Chicago, but it's not elsewhere, I'm sure.
Hi.
Good morning, everyone. Lois, I have made you co-host, so if you would please assist me in letting people into the room. I'm still trying to put some links up on Facebook, but we are actually streaming to YouTube today, and I think we might continue doing that into the future. I'm tired of Facebook. But welcome, Alex. Great to have you. Is this your first time joining us?
Yes.
Enable. Okay.
Can you pronounce your name for me?
Cesare.
Cesare. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Let's see. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. As good as it gets.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, I'm as you can see, I have a lot of white with age.
A lot of what? Oh, hair you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm gonna move to more light so you can actually see me. For now, there you go. How's that?
So I'm
So
still, yeah,
who is the
I
expert
think I
on
can see.
monopolies?
Well, uh, I will be presenting today. I know a little bit about economics. Hopefully, there will be other people to complete the picture. So
Okay.
we're going to be starting in. Just give us about 2 or 3 minutes to get going. It usually takes a few minutes for other people to arrive.
All right.
And in the meantime, we're trying to just do a little bit of promoting online. So we can chat if other people arrive. So
Welcome, Avery, and welcome, Tom Robinson. Good to see you. Or
Thank you.
good to know that you're here. Your camera's off.
Thanks.
So as I was just saying, we're going to get going in just a little bit. Still making some posts on social media to let people know that they can come and participate in democracy. But we're going to be going in about 2 or 3 minutes after the top of the hour. We can chit chat a little bit until then. Trying to make a post on Facebook here, but I don't know. Oh, there it is. Lois, would you please get a mic check from everyone? Ensure that everyone is connected and that we can hear them, and they'll be able to participate.
Okay. Well, so far we've heard from Alex, Miller, and Avery. At least I heard them use their microphone. So, Tom, hi. Mic check, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. It's a little faint, so I'm going to turn up the volume a little more on my local device. Others
Okay.
can adjust accordingly. Hello, Jeff Kelson. Good to see you again. Mic check from you, please.
Hello.
Excellent. Wonderful. All right, so we're getting started in a few minutes. Cesare is setting up some final things. Let's see. But in the meantime, maybe I can see about getting the link to well, I'll let Cesare direct.
There's one more place I'm trying to make a post here on Facebook, and just give me a moment.
So
I'm
I
hoping
have
that.
not.
But
You're hoping,
go ahead.
yes?
No, go ahead.
Oh. I have not been a user of Facebook for many years. So you're making posts right now, because like, do people check it like instantly, so that if you make a post right now, someone will immediately see it? Is that how it works now?
Yeah. Well, they might get a pop-up. It used to be more relevant when we did live streams on Facebook, but we're doing a live stream to YouTube this time. So I don't know. Usually Facebook would promote your posts a little bit, um, because they want people to engage with Facebook, but I don't know if it's going to work.
Okay. I remember when I used Facebook, the posts that I would see were a day old usually, but that was several years ago when it was less common for people to use it on their phones, and they really used it on personal computers. And also I had less friends than a lot of people do nowadays. And when you have more friends, you can usually see more recent content. But yeah, back when I used Facebook, they didn't have ads. Now they do. I heard that Netflix is going to start adding ads to their content.
Okay,
Oh, too bad.
we
We
are
have one
done.
more person joining us named Asan, I think. Asan, can you hear us? And we'd like a microphone check so we can hear you.
Hey, my name is Hassan. Thanks for allowing me in this meeting.
Oh, wonderful. We're glad that you're here. Okay, so Cesara, you were saying something?
We're ready to get going. So, good morning, everyone, or whatever time it is by you. Good afternoon, good evening. We should start with the reading of the opening notes to set the stage. That lets everyone know what the rules are that we play by here. I should have actually had that already available. I don't, but it will just take me a moment to pull this up. I'm going to put the link to the opening notes in the chat so that anyone can read them from their own screen if they prefer. But otherwise, Lois, would you be willing to read the opening notes for us?
I could, but I do it every time. Is there someone else who wants to volunteer to read it? I don't hear anything, and
I could do that if you want.
oh, okay, cool. Thanks, Jeff. Take it away.
Okay. For your opening notes, we maintain the right to freedom of speech. This does not include threats or harassment of other participants. As individuals, we are partial. As a group, we are impartial. We are here to develop our own philosophies and to assist in one another in doing so. Be mindful of everyone's time. You will have more than one chance to speak. Time limits may be imposed. This community is what you make it. Says criticism is cheap. We want better ideas. Speak up. Focus on advancing your best ideas, not on winning every argument. Like strategic. Be strategic. We are here to do politics, not to comment or on politicians doing politics. Take a stand for ideas, not faces. Be presentable at citizens' assembly. An idea must be written as a plain text document, published for others to see and copy left for others to use. We use agoralp.org to conveniently and efficiently share our ideas. We follow a specific format. The presenter presents an idea, 1 minute, 11 minutes, was it 11? 11 minutes maximum. We measure the agreement with the idea, quick show of hands. We measure the support in the agora for that idea, quick show of hands. In other words, doing a raised hand for each item. We deliberate in strict order of claimed turns. Again, this is indicating the clicking of raised hand. We conclude with uninterrupted closing remarks by each participant. In other words, there's a preference in this regard for people indicating that they want to speak, to showing the raising of the hand. So that is a way of showing respect and courtesy and letting the host know that the person wants to speak so they will not interrupt others. Respect your host. The Citizen Assembly Network is inclusive of everyone, but the host of any particular meeting has the right to dismiss any participant whom they are unable to handle. And that is something that should always be somewhat the right of the host, because we are all here to be respected to receive courtesy and to provide courtesy and to have everyone respect our time and our speaking. So these are things that should be adhered to help maintain respect, attitudes, and dignified atmosphere. The proper way to address other participants is citizen. Well, I accept that as a premise here. It's weird for me, but I accept it as a premise in coming in. Help us help you. Use the chat to share any information and resources that you think are important. This meeting is a part of a larger process. We encourage you to present one of your ideas at an upcoming citizen assembly, to organize your own citizen assembly meetings about topics important to you, to host your own citizen office hours to discuss ideas one-on-one in greater depth, and to make connections with other participants to network and socialize. I don't know for sure if that's the ending, but that's the last that I see on my screen.
Thank you very much. Jeff.
You're welcome.
I will move us on to the introduction portion. Is there anyone who would like to lead us in the introduction, meaning calling on people and making sure that we all stay in order and making sure that we stay within about 30 seconds maximum? This is intended to be just a very brief taste of who we're going to be working with today, not for everyone to say everything that's on their mind. Do we have any volunteers to lead us in the introductions? Citizen Jeff, would you like to continue leading us and ensure everyone is introduced properly?
I'm okay with that. I didn't want to make the assumption that we're doing both.
Okay. Just one thing before we go. I put in the chat what we're looking for: your name, your nation, your main interest as a thinker, and your main concern as an activist. So those 4 things. You can also add where you're currently located if you wish. It's not necessary. Jeff, take it away, please.
Okay, do you have a particular preference of order on doing this?
It is up to you. That's why you're involved.
All right. I'm going to go in the order that you were starting to say something, Cesare. Looks that way.
Yeah, one thing, but please do go first. We should always try to lead by example.
Okay. Okay, Jeff, you refer to it as United States and New York City. And I've been here before, but for me, the coming in is very challenging as I don't navigate the links very well. So today, this morning, I stumbled upon an email in an address I don't use very much, and it led me to seeing an interview between Cesare and Cynthia that I had no idea was there, and it gave me a lot of insight into how you handle yourself, Cesare. It was interesting to watch. So I found my way while I'm watching that interview of about an hour. I spent some time navigating through various history of links and managed to find the one to come into this meeting. So that's how I managed to be here on time. Okay, with that having been said, I will go in the order that I see on my screen for egalitarian purposes. And so the first one that I have on my screen is Cesare. So if you wouldn't mind, Cesare, being next in introducing yourself.
My name is Cesare Jurevich from the nation of United States of America, currently located outside of Chicago. My main interest as a thinker, that's ethics and economics. My main concerns as an activist, that's animal liberation and social and economic justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Cesare. The next person I see on my screen, I had forgotten to use your way of doing that for the moment, would be Citizen Tom. So I will offer Citizen Tom the chance to go next.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. And by the way, you don't have to refer to me as Citizen Tom. Tom will be fine. My name's Tom Robinson. I'm from the USA also. I'm in Omaha, Nebraska. My main interest as a thinker, I would say, would be universal basic income. I'm also a supporter of ranked choice voting, the national popular vote interstate compact, and I believe in a single payer healthcare system. I'm no longer really an activist, so no major concerns there. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Next person in order on my screen would be Citizen Alex. Would you like to go next?
Okay, I'm Alex. I am outside of Philadelphia. And I studied economics in school. Primarily the old Samuelson philosophy. And I always had genuine interest in macroeconomics. And monopolies are part of that. So I am anxious to hear opinions today in the discussion.
Thank you, Alex. Next person on my screen would be Citizen Lois. Would you like to take it away?
Hello, everyone. My name is Lois Diggs Jurevich, but you may call me Citizen Jurevich, or something else if that's too difficult. I added a pronunciation aid. All right, my nation, whenever this part comes up, I say I'm from the state of Illinois, and that's not because I am United States centric. It's because I believe that this United States would be better off if more sovereignty of the individual states were restored to how it was over 100 years ago. So that's what I'm thinking about lately. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Citizen Jurevich. That's how you asked to be referred to. And next would be Citizen Avery. Would you like to go next?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so my name is Avery. My nation is Canada. My location is basically the Toronto area, would be the most correct. My main interest as a thinker is similar to Cesare in that I'm most interested in social and economic inequalities, as in trying to solve those issues. And those are my main concerns, I would say, as well. That ties into that. But yeah, that's all I had to say. Thank you, Jeff.
Welcome, Avery. And the last but not least on the screen would be Asan. Would you like to take it away, Asan?
Yeah, that's no problem. And my name is Hassan Ol Kabir, but most people can call me Haz, H-A-Z for short, and it's simple. My nation is Dublin, Ireland, which is in Europe. My interest as a thinker will be how to use modern technology into societal projects and to make economical improvements as a whole country and the continent of Europe, or to make improvements as a society in terms of like living in a country or city, or improvement of mental health and the well-being of each citizen in such countries. My main concern as an activist, I don't really have one. Maybe in terms of like the well-being of every EU or citizen, in terms of the well-being mentally, physically, and probably to an extent the environmental surroundings around us. So that's me introducing myself. Thank you. And oh, you can call me Haz as opposed to Citizen Hassan if you like. Thank you.
Thank you, Asan. Back to you, Cesare.
Okay, thank you very much, Citizen Jeff, for taking the lead. We always want to develop leadership skills here, create new leaders to have more citizen assemblies. Before we move on, I do want to say that we will be distributing another one of these fantastic Control Your Government t-shirts. On the back, just so you can see, it says International Logic Party, and it has the visual representation of Agora, the worldwide stock market of ideas, which is the technology that we use to organize information and people for political action. So yeah, at the end, after the assembly, we'll be voting on, but the participants here will be voting on who had the most insightful contribution during the meeting. So please make a note of that, like in the back of your mind, who might have you think really contributed. Now, what I want to do, I want to take a few minutes to actually present Agora, our technology, what we use to organize information, and then I will move on to the presentation of today's idea. I know many of you have heard this before, but some of you have not, are new here. So very quickly, to summarize, Agora basically is a new kind of networking technology where each person is developing their own political philosophy. It's not social media, it's actually political and philosophical media. The way that any political candidate has their political platform, which issues they stand for, we want every citizen to engage in doing that. But then Agora aggregates all of that information to show which ideas have the most support from the people. And then so we can cross-reference the top ideas to people who represent the top ideas, and then create lists of political candidates for any government position around the world, any elected government position, and actually field candidates as the International Logic Party, a party that tries to be logical instead of ideological, and actually replacing money in politics with math, with an algorithm. So I want to show you very quickly how this interface looks, so just bear with me for a moment. I'm gonna share my screen here. Okay, so I'm already logged into Agora here. I'm going to I'm not going to show you the login process. Basically, agora-ilp.org, and if somebody would please put that in the chat, just if anybody needs that link. But the homepage here in Agora, this is basically it's about you. It's all about you developing your thinking, your best ideas. And it's called the ideological profile. This is my home screen here. It's got some information about me, how to get a hold of me, things like that. But these are my ideas. This top idea, and there is a structure to the ideological profile. The top idea here, the most points you can give to any idea is 23 points. And then the next idea is 22 points. The purpose of this is to incentivize people to actually structure their thinking, to organize it. It's like a book of philosophy. If you were to write a book of your philosophy, you would want people to probably start with chapter 1 instead of chapter 5 or chapter 19 or something. So by assigning point value, we incentivize people to prioritize the things that they would want other people to read first. So this is my fundamental philosophy. You'll notice that there are 3 supporters. There are 3 people who share this idea, and together we give it 43 points. This next idea, I give it 22 points, but there are 3 supporters. Together we give it 53 points, and so on. With all these different ideas, this idea, for example, actually let me use this one as an example. I give this idea 15 points. It has 133 points total from 10 supporters. And then over here in the ideas screen, I'm skipping over a lot because I don't want this to take forever. There's a lot here in Agora to explore. But when you look at the idea dominance index, you will see what are the top ideas that are supported by the people within the system. So this is the #1 idea in the world with 133 points from 10 supporters. And that's actually about the universal basic income. The #2 idea is about voting reform and ballot access. It has 83 points from 5 supporters. And so on with all these different ideas. You will see that they're organized according to how many points they have. So there are some ideas that are more popular, like this idea is more popular, but it actually has less points because people don't value it as strongly. And you will find all kinds of ideas. There are hundreds of ideas here. Some of these ideas are brilliant, some of these ideas are idiotic, but it's up to you to find the best ideas and support the best ideas so they can rise to the top, so more people can learn about them and support them. Of course, here's the meeting section. This is really what it's all about, bringing people together to deliberate these ideas. Well, I like to say it's all about, no, well, it's about a lot more than that. But so the next meeting has not been posted yet, but so it's going to be in about a month. But the other thing is that we want political candidates. Now, I'm only using myself as an example here. I don't really want to be president of the United States, but here um, we have a candidate rank listing, so we can create a list of candidates for any government position in the world here. So, for example, for head of state of the United States, here's me. I'm the only candidate, but not really. I don't want this. I don't really want that job because we don't have anyone else willing to do it. So, yeah. And the same thing, this is for any other country. This is just because I'm from the United States of America. You know, you can put in your nation over here and do the same. Now, the other thing I want to show you about Agora before we move on is everything that we've seen so far. This is the main Agora. There's also the municipal Agora to organize information at the local level. So, for example, for me, this is Chicago, Illinois. That's my metropolis. It's not technically where I live, but to me, it's much more interesting. And then there are also Agora communities. And today's idea that we're going to be discussing, that I'm going to be presenting, is actually from one of the communities. It's the Truths We All Should Know community. And just to show you, there are several default communities that everyone is a part of. Agora Development, which is ideas for how to improve the website. Truths We All Should Know, Stories We All Should Hear. World's Biggest Challenges. There's a citizen assembly community for making these meetings better, ideas about how to do that. Shaping culture, one of my favorites. I love the ideas that, because we don't need politicians for these things. These are things that we can do at an individual or family level to shape culture, but at the same time share ideas about that worldwide. Media we can trust. To me, that's a fascinating one. And conversely, businesses to boycott. So, and other communities as well. You can organize, for example, here is a state of Illinois community to focus just on the issues here. And there's also one of my favorites, Regimes to Overthrow, which is making a hit list of which dictators we should take out. Anyways, all fun stuff, right? So I'm gonna wrap up with the presentation of Agora here. Looks like we got one other person joining us. Fantastic. But I'm gonna try to, now today's idea. Yes, do we have a raised hand, Tom?
Yeah, I just have one quick question about Agora that I think you can answer, Cesare. I visit the site, fairly frequently, but sometimes, often, I don't go in and change anything. I don't reorder my ideas. I don't add somebody else's idea. Does that count as keeping me active, or do I have to actually change something to be active?
No, actually, logging in counts as keeping you active, and you'll be able to notice the difference. Well, you should be able to notice that. Yeah, this is an important point, just so everybody knows, because basically, Igora is kind of like voting. I mean, it's, yeah, in a way, there are voting aspects to it. So, and of course, we don't want dead people voting. So, people's profiles do become inactive after about 3 weeks, and their points don't count. So you do have to periodically log back in to show to the rest of the people that you're still alive, and so that your points, your ideas count again, because otherwise they will lose value. You're still going to have those ideas. They're just not going to be your points are not going to be not just your points, but your votes or your it your contribution, your support will not be tallied. It will be excluded from the totals. Yeah. Okay, so I want to move on. We have about 11 minutes to stay on track. Now, today's idea is pretty big. And I don't presume that everyone here has read it, and I do want to read the idea in full for us to have a good discussion. So I will try to read through the whole thing, probably leaving little time for commentary. But let me just share the link to it real quick. For those of you who might find it easier just to read it directly, I'm going to put that in the chat. Okay, that's the link to the idea. I will share it up on screen here in just a moment. Share screen. All right. So another important thing, this is so a few things just to set the context. Keep in mind that this is the community agora. These are not, this is intended to be informative, to inform and complete the picture of the main agora. This is, I want to say it's not as important. It's more like a side thing. So keep that in mind. The other thing that I want to point out here, because a lot of people get tripped up on this, economic monopolies are not inherently bad. That's the actual concept. We're not saying that monopolies are good. We're not saying that they are great. We're not saying that they are the best thing ever. We're just saying that they're not inherently bad. So please keep that in mind when considering this, because this is just because this idea is largely in a response to people very much having this just like instinct reaction. Oh my God, it's a monopoly. It's horrible. It's terrible. Well, this is intended to give you a little more, everyone, a little more perspective on that. I'm gonna try. I'm gonna just to keep myself kind of on time. I might go a little bit long. I do apologize for that, but I think it's important for us to have a good discussion to actually read through all of it. So I'll set the timer for. Well, I'm just gonna start it right now, and then I'm gonna start reading and try to wrap up as soon as I can. All right. It is a commonly held misconception that monopolies are always bad for an economy. However, this is not completely true. Indeed, monopolies do often take maximum advantage of their pricing power, but this is not as problematic as people make it out to be. Here we will examine 5 points that illuminate the issues concerning monopolies, thereby helping us make the most of monopolies in an economy. 1. Monopolies almost never really exist. For example, when you think of an economic monopoly, you probably imagine the most far-fetched worst-case scenario of being in the middle of a scorching desert with no water, and there's only one vendor willing to sell you a bottle of water for a price that will indebt you for the rest of your life. However, this basically never happens. Sure, there might be a shop somewhere in the Sahara with the only other place to get a drink of water 10 days walking distance away. But if you have an automobile to take you to another vendor or to an oasis, this is not a real monopoly. The point is that you have options. Buy water from that vendor or keep going to the next one. Or you can pull out your shovel and start digging down to an aquifer. Oh, but you don't have an automobile with you, or nor a shovel, nor even a bottle of water. Well, what were you thinking going into the Sahara so ridiculously unprepared? Maybe your lack of interest in staying alive is a bigger problem than the vendor's prices. That's supposed to be a joke. But in all seriousness, if you really do find yourself in such an unlikely situation and you do not have any option for obtaining water other than from the predatory vendor, there are still other ways of handling this situation, legal and extra-legal. Regarding the legal methods, you will typically be able to get out of the crippling debt by declaring bankruptcy. Yes, declaring bankruptcy is a high price to pay for a bottle of water, but remember that the alternative was losing your life. So you're actually getting a much better deal. And regarding the extra-legal methods, if a monopolistic vendor exceeds the limits of human decency, their dealings are likely to provoke violent conflict, possibly leading, leading to their own death. Thus, predatory monopolistic vendors must be aware that their business practices can cross the boundary from economics into ethics, and they might be the ones paying the ultimate price for overstepping that boundary. Okay, I'd love to comment, but I gotta keep going. Even monopolies are subject to market limitations. This point is more advanced, and an economic textbook will provide a much better explanation of it, but the essence of it is that there is a limit to what a monopoly can charge for their products or services, because the vast majority of products are not vital, and people can ultimately go without them. For example, as important and practical as having a cell phone may be in our modern society, if there is only one cell phone service provider in a region, and if they charge an absurdly high price, then the economy of that region will simply have to function without cell phone service, just as it did before cell phones were invented. This arrangement will continue until another cell phone provider enters the market and breaks the monopoly. So basically, just here, it's like you don't have to have most things. You know, most people think that monopolies on luxuries are monopolies, but they're not. Just live without it. Just how you did before. Okay, 3. Monopolies are short-lived. When there is a monopoly, real or not, in the market for some product or service, it typically appears to us that the monopolistic provider has a stranglehold on the market forever. But in reality, monopolies do not exist for very long, especially in our modern era of extremely rapid technological innovation. The reason that monopolies are short-lived is that the high profits that a monopoly can generate attracts competition from other businesses, and within the span of a few years, sometimes even months, the monopoly is broken. Ironically, that what does tend to uphold monopolies for longer than their natural lifespan is government regulations that are put in place to supposedly protect the consumers from price gouging by the monopoly, because those regulations tend to enshrine the monopoly into the working order of the economy. As such, government regulations of monopolies are very often a greater detriment to an economy than the monopoly itself. Thus, the consumers are usually better off by paying higher prices to the monopoly in the short run, thereby incentivizing competition and innovation so that they can enjoy much lower prices in the long run. Basically, here we're saying just deal with it until someone else provides an alternative, and maybe that someone should be you. So, and but the worst thing it really ends up being is when, not always, but very often, is when basically people through their governments, and it's really the monopoly, or it's like basically corporate lobbying that will actually make that monopoly last much longer than it naturally would. All right, continuing. Monopolies reward innovation. Let us return to the scenario from point 1. While being indebted for the rest of your life is an extremely high price to pay for a bottle of water, is it not still better than to not have that option at all? Certainly, it is ideal when you have fierce market competition of many vendors trying to sell you their goods and services at the lowest price. And if you have only one vendor using their monopolistic bargaining power to maximize their profit, it is extremely tempting to blame and shame them for being greedy. However, maybe you should instead be more appreciative of that one pioneering vendor for taking a business risk to provide you with a product or service that no one else was willing to offer. That one lone vendor in the middle of the Sahara could have easily opened a shop in some other location, a location with bustling business activity, a location that was not dependent on an unequipped idiot to keep their business operational. But instead, they undertook a venture that all other entrepreneurs refused, and they saved your life in the process. This is a win for everyone. Okay, all jokes aside, the point is that high profits of a monopoly attract innovators and entrepreneurs into areas of the market that other businesses uh, are not willing to supply. Therefore, we should be more appreciative of monopolistic pioneers, because if not for their businesses, we would have a non-opoly, and our demand for their goods or services would remain completely unsatisfied. So very quickly, coming back to that scenario from point 1, if that vendor was not there, and well, then you would die. But if that vendor is there and they do charge a lot of money for just a bottle of water, and if they succeed, if their business succeeds, well, guess what? Then somebody else is going to set up shop, and they're going to start selling water for a lower price. And then, if that pays off, someone else will come, and they will want a piece of that pie too, and they're going to start selling more water. Basically, supply and demand will match one another. The reason that nobody does it is because it's a stupid idea, and if you're in the middle of the Sahara without proper equipment, well, then you're an idiot, and you're probably better off. Actually, society is better off with you being dead. So it's not a problem. Anyways, the market solves the problem, but in the meantime, at least the monopoly is there to provide a service that no one else is willing to do. Okay, point 5. Monopolies can be great when everyone is a shareholder. I just want to comment here. This is actually, this point here, this is the main reason why I wrote this idea. To me, this is the most interesting thing. But all right, let me continue reading. Monopolies use their pricing power to maximize their profits to pass them on to the owners of the business, i.e. the shareholders. This practice can make some people, that is the shareholders, very rich while leaving everyone else resentful that they are not the shareholders. So basically people are jealous that they are not the ones who actually own the monopoly. The mythical monopolistic water vendor in the Sahara is the perfect example of such resentment. I mean, yeah, everybody hates the guy, but they actually wish they were the guy, and they could, get away with it. But they didn't do it. Anyways, continuing. But what if everyone was a shareholder in the monopoly? Could not everyone be made better off if they were co-owners of a business monopoly? So basically, if everyone is sharing the profits, then it's a wash, right? But continuing. Well, yes, they would. If the business could actually remain competitive by remaining the most innovative. Except that if everyone was involved in making the decisions about the future course of the business would very quickly stop being innovative because it would become paralyzed by the conflicting visions of all the shareholders. Subsequently, the monopoly would be broken and outcompeted by more agile businesses with more focused visions, and as a result, everyone would lose. So if okay, I'm going to refrain from commenting. After all, why doesn't everyone think it is such a great idea to sell bottles of water in the middle of the Sahara for 1 million times their typical market price? Certainly, if you were to find yourself in the situation of having to buy from such a business, then it would be great to be the co-owner of that business, but almost no one is interested in starting such a business individually, and we are even less interested in doing so collectively. This is why it is impossible for everyone to be a shareholder in a business monopoly when the business must be highly innovative for it to be competitive. However, there are instances where businesses hardly have to do any innovation to remain competitive, or where the innovation that is required is rather uncontroversial. For example, the municipal water supply or the local road system. Such businesses are actually the most efficient as communally owned monopolies rather than market competitors because they're able to have lower marketing and administrative costs. Thus, under certain conditions, it is possible for monopolies with everyone as a shareholder to be the best arrangement for the economy. Very quickly, it's monopolies can be really the only way to go when naturally it would make sense to eliminate the competition and actually consolidate everything under one administration. Like a municipal water supply, it's not like some people want strawberry flavored water delivered to their home and other people want lemon flavored water. Everybody just wants plain water. Like they don't have to innovate. They don't have to they just want clean water. It's very uncontroversial. That's why it's so easy to run it as a communally owned monopoly. So it is possible for monopolies to be actually the best arrangement in an economy. Really addressing the point here that monopolies are not inherently bad. That's what we're talking about. We're not saying they're good or they're the best all the time. Just that's the point that we're defending. In conclusion, our goal here is not to advocate for monopolies, but to illuminate the issues concerning them so that we do not blindly conclude that all monopolies are always necessarily bad for an economy. In general, we recognize that it is ideal that we have fierce competition of many vendors trying to provide the best products at the lowest price. However, if we are ever faced with a monopoly, we should now be able to deal with it both figuratively and literally. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. I kind of forgot what that meant. Yeah, deal with it on a psychological level and deal with it, as in actually conducting business with it. So that's the idea here. It's really meant to give people perspective as they go about understanding economics in general. I'm really interested in moving on to the discussion to hear what people have to say. I just want to check on the time. It's 12 and a half minutes, so I do thank you for your patience. One thing that we do before we move on to the deliberation is to get a quick show of hands for people who agree with the idea generally, and then people who support the idea or who intend to support the idea in Agora. So first, can we please have a show of hands of people who agree with this idea, at least for the most part, or to a larger extent? So we have myself, Citizen Tom, or Tom, as he prefers to be called. Okay, we do have a fair amount, about half. All right, who supports the idea or who intends to support the idea by adding it to their Truths We All Should Know profile? Quick show of hands, please. Okay, that looks like it might be just me. All right, so let's move on to the deliberation. We are going to be using the Zoom function for raising hands, so please just use the raise hand feature in Zoom. It seems to be a good way to keep an order for everyone. Do we have anyone? Anyone with their hands up? Okay, Citizen Jeff, you have the floor.
Okay. Largely, you have merit to what in your argument. Largely, you do, but part of the problem is that where it does have value is in the beginning. Is if you look at the tradition and history and patterns of the monopolies that develop with large corporations, even if you do become a minority shareholder, as you're referring to as being one of the positive aspects, one of the primary objectives and tasks of that monopoly is to drive away competition. It might not be what they're supposed to do, and there are plenty of professors who would argue that that's not one of their tasks. But if you look at what they actually do, the larger ones, when another competitor comes in to try to sell the same product, they make a point of reducing their price below the competitor so that the competitor can't sell it, whatever it might be. The bottle of water in the Sahara Desert, of course, defines where it's not a problem. But with other products in other arenas, other regions, other matters, that they tend to do what they can to make sure that they don't have any competition that's really competitive. That's just what they do. Now, when it comes to anybody trying to operate in that arena, they don't have any laws to help them to keep the competition away. When it comes to the nature of legislation that helps them, the two problems with legislation: one is it tends to be written by the monopoly. The other is that the legislation tends to be based upon what they would like to see happen, but generally doesn't. The reason why monopolies persist, you mentioned that they have a natural degrading over time, but it's just not the case. Most of the monopolies, there are some that have been attacked over time and eventually have to give up some of their power, but that takes a lot of years, and it only happens because they get fought in the courts. You literally have judges taking away their power, not time. So I would suggest that the power over time being diluted, except for happening in court, doesn't tend to happen. They tend to get stronger, not weaker. So there is a valid premise to what you say in some of the regards, that shareholders can benefit, that people can benefit from a strong company, can benefit from a company that's backed, from a product that's backed, excuse me, from knowing that they can get that product in the future, from knowing that they are very unlikely to deal with a company that's going to disregard their needs. But overall, when it comes to the power involved, they tend to forget that they serve the public. They tend to be more about serving the shareholders, which tends to be not that many people. So I just wanted to offer that perspective.
Thank you. Citizen Jurevich.
Thanks. So, I did not indicate support for the idea, and I want to explain a little bit about why by focusing on the first point in the written idea. So basically, you start out by saying monopolies are not inherently bad because, first of all, monopolies almost never really exist. That's like saying, oh, tigers are not inherently dangerous because they're an endangered species and there are so few of them, like that doesn't really, that's not really relevant. And then you say, well, even if there is a monopoly, it will probably end in bankruptcy, which is not so bad, or violent conflict, which is not so bad. And I think those are bad things, you know? So just right in the beginning, right off, I'm disagreeing with what you're saying. And then just to comment on monopolies, it seems to me that monopolies are not really so much about identified by company, but by situation. I did a quick internet search on what may be considered monopolies nowadays in this world. And the results that came up were things like Google and Facebook. But I don't use Google and I don't use Facebook. I use other things. So, you know, I don't think that would fall under the definition of the monopoly that you have here in your idea, Cesare. You know, that's just a note, comment. I'm not saying that you're wrong in your definition. I'm just saying that it seems to me that the more true monopolies are more situational, you know, on where you are, you know, like in the Sahara Desert, like you mentioned, like, oh, well, I mean, you didn't say that was a real monopoly because you said, oh, like you can travel 10 days somewhere else, but practically speaking, for example, sometimes if a group of people decides to enter an amusement park for the day and there are rules against bringing food and the amusement park sells food inside the theme park, I'd consider that like a monopoly situationally, even though people do have the option of, you know, like you mentioned, one of the not legal options is to sneak food in, or it's not really that hard to just leave the park when you get hungry and eat like food, your own food, and then come back in. So anyway, those are just some thoughts that I have.
Thank you. We have a hand up from Citizen Alex. You have the floor.
Okay, first I want to say that you were very creative in writing up these ideas. If you were a lobbyist for monopolies, you would get a promotion and a big bonus. Uh, I am in line with Jeff's comments, so I'm not going to paraphrase them. I'll just say that the best way to look at these things is to look at history of monopolies and see how things pan out. We have a long history in this country of monopolies. Most of us in our age group are already not familiar with the details, but I can bring two examples that are fairly current, at least in my time. One is AT&T, not the current one, but the old one, who had the monopoly on long distance phone calls. And the second one is Microsoft, which is contemporary, and I watched Microsoft from the beginning and I saw the results. And if you look at those things, at least in those two examples, I don't think, Cesare, what you described is realistic. It's not what's happening.
Is that it? You were finished speaking? Please, anyone, when they finish speaking, let us know that you're yielding the floor, or let us know some other way.
Well, this is my first time here, so I'm not sure what the format is. I like to give concise and short answers and then follow the discussion as we go along.
So you're finished speaking, yes? Okay. All right, looks like I have my hand up next. So, um, let's see. I think I think what's the purpose of this idea? What's the purpose of sharing this idea? I think to me, it really comes from wanting people to have a better understanding of economics and them trying to fight market forces. Like you can't fight market forces. You are going to lose. In the long run, the market always wins. Um, People can try to make it complicated, but when you make it complicated, you give the advantage to people who have money because they have the resources to navigate those complexities. People who have less money, you make it more difficult for them. That's why we need to make things as simple as possible. And so the idea that comes to mind is this, trying to regulate things and um, trying to yeah, trying to regulate things. I want to come back to the point that Citizen Jeff was making about monopolies lowering prices to kill competition. That is an interesting strategy, and it's great. I mean, like let's imagine there's a company who invents something that makes everyone lives better. And then a competitor comes in the market. Now, you always have to wonder, where do these competitors come from? Like, sometimes, I hear about like this new airline. I'm like, oh, geez, what did my neighbor down the street just decide? Like, oh, we don't have enough airlines. I'm going to start my own airline. And no, that's not what happened. My neighbor down the street doesn't have enough money to start their own airline. It is some other business, some other industry, or someone who has already made a lot of money from a different business that's now opening up a new business as an airline or a new telephone line. Where are all these new telephone line? Like, I'm not gonna start a telephone, service provider. You have to have a lot of capital to make this happen. So it's these other businesses that are entering the market to try to get into that. So when you do have a monopoly, some business, creates some kind of a new product that everybody wants, and everybody was living just fine without that product. We were all doing well. No, okay, that's I'm being sarcastic. No, but maybe it really is very valuable. But still, life was going on. People were living. We were doing business. We were handling things okay. But then this business, sure, they have a great product and they're charging a lot for it because they're the only ones. But then another business, I don't know, somebody who maybe owned an airline or somebody who owned a telephone company. Now they decide they're going to enter this market and also create a business that also copies this product. And the other monopoly, because they made so much money from this monopoly, they lower the prices to kill the competition. Well, I'm sorry, I don't really feel bad for that, for anybody. I don't feel bad for the original monopoly losing profits because now they have to cut their prices, and I don't feel bad for the other business. First of all, they're probably not going to go out of business because their money already comes from another gigantic business. So I really don't feel bad about a monopoly trying to kill the competitors by lowering their prices because frankly, they're not going to win because either that other pool of capital will just be like, you know what, we're going to keep competing. We're not going to let go. We're going to keep offering this product, and eventually, it's not a monopoly anymore. So the consumers win, or they do give up, and then guess what happens? So then, the monopoly, the original monopoly, kills the competition, and then they raise their prices again, and then guess what happens? 3 months go by or a few years go by, and another business is going to be like, you know what? We are going to try what the other people failed at doing, and we're going to try to offer this product, and eventually. Somebody is going to enter that market and they're going to break the monopoly, especially as technology is changing. So this is not a problem. Like none of this is a problem. What is a problem, and this is a much greater problem, is I think people's psychology of just being cheap and expecting everything at the lowest price. No, like somebody actually did something innovative. They created a great product that now everybody wants, and they're charging a lot for it, but pay. You didn't do it. Pay. I mean, you were living fine. It's not like they're hurting you by offering you this great new service, but you just expect everything to be cheap. I think this is just people being greedy. I think it is just the individual greed of the consumers that is blinding them to the value of the innovative industry. And 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 frankly, that makes us all worse off. This lazy greed is makes us worse off because we try to find ways to make then the governance structure more competitive. We try to break the monopoly and do all this nonsense because you're not going to beat the market. The market always wins. It's nature. You can't fight it. So then people create these rules that actually make people with money wealthier because of your own laziness, because of your own greed. You make people with a lot of money wealthier because the complexities you create out of your laziness or you allow to be created, because usually it's the monopoly, because this is another way that the monopoly will defend its territory. They will try to lower prices or they will try to create regulation through governance. So they will use their profits to put that into legislation to try to kill the competition. But you let it happen because you're like, oh yeah, oh, it's a monopoly, it's so bad, so we have to let them create all this legislation that supposedly is going to kill the monopoly, which it doesn't, it just enshrines it. So the people, through their greed and laziness, they actually make everyone else poor. And what's to me really important is that people just learn to accept it, just pay the damn higher prices. You're not the one who did it until somebody actually comes along with a legitimate business competition and provides the product at a lower price. Um, I yield the floor. And the next, we have a hand up from Citizen Jurevich. You have the floor.
I'm want to make sure I understand this idea correctly. So my question to the author is, are you saying that if there is a way for someone to be very creative and very extreme in getting around a monopoly, then it's not really a monopoly? Are you saying that the only monopolies are the ones that are absolutely insurmountable? That you must participate in that? That's my question. That's all.
I did not understand the question. Please use the time that you still have to restate it or clarify it.
Okay, so someone might have a monopoly on selling water, but you could dig your own well. In such a case, is that a true monopoly, Cesare? Because digging a well is a very creative, very extreme way of getting around a monopoly on water.
Thank you. We have the hand up from Citizen Alex next. You have the floor.
Okay, Cesare, what you just described contradicts your previous comment about market forces. I don't think it's really a big deal one way or another because this is not the main issue with monopolies. What happened with Microsoft, for instance, is a good example. So when Microsoft felt that anyone has any potential of competition, they used their tremendous treasure trove that they accumulated from being a monopolist, and they buy the company. So that's one easy way to eliminate the competition. The second thing is monopolies have political power, and probably that is the worst thing of all of them. Because if you take Microsoft, for instance, there's a law in this country, I don't know when it was instituted, but talks about, it's an anti-monopoly law, and talks about prohibition of vertical integration in business. I know about this in particular because I read once in an article about a company raising raisins in California, a raisin company. And what they did, they bought up the railroad company and that gave them exclusive rights to transportation and prevented the other growers of raisins from transporting their products to the market. So there was a law against that, and I believe that is still in the books. Now, what happened in the case of Microsoft? Microsoft has this platform, okay? The MS-DOS or Windows now they call it, and because of that, they have the ability to control how other companies, competitors potentially, will appear to users. Now, in Microsoft, the search engine, the way it's set up now, puts other competitors of iOS providers at a disadvantage. The search doesn't bring them up. It's hard to access them. I mean, over the years, Microsoft has done more and more of these things. And I can't tell you the details, and it doesn't make sense to tell you the details, but I followed. Every year they come up with a new trick to hinder the other users. And they do that even though it's illegal, and they get away with it because they have tremendous political power. That's what the main problem is with the monopolies. So Microsoft is not inventive. They created Microsoft by buying up or eliminating other companies that now it's in their portfolio, from browsers, from suites, from everything else. They did not create a single thing.
Let us know when you're done speaking, please.
I'm done.
Thank you. Okay. Not seeing any hands up, but I will raise my own hand. Okay. So I'm trying to remember what Citizen Lois was saying exactly. Basically, people are too lazy to dig their own wells. Yeah, collecting rainwater, or collecting rainwater, or buying bottled water, or digging your own well. All of those are options, but people are just too lazy to do it. You can do it, but there are options. So it's not a real monopoly. You're just too lazy to access the alternatives that you have. If the problem becomes severe enough, then you will do it. Because, if you're going to pay like, $10 for a gallon of water, or I don't know, drive to the next town over and just, or whatever, buy it much cheaper somewhere else, then you're going to start doing those other things. Regarding the company that bought up the railroads to transport the raisins, I hate raisins. I really don't give a damn about raisins. If the price of raisins goes from, $2 per pound to $4 per pound, I'm still going to eat just about the same amount of raisins. It's not a problem. And occasionally I do enjoy raisins. Very, very infrequently do I enjoy raisins. And at that point, I don't really care, because you know what? Frankly, there are so many alternatives that I do have. Sure, they have a monopoly on raisins, but so what? So freaking what? And maybe you should be growing your own raisins. They're probably going to be much better for you. So again, I think people have this fascination with this poor appreciation of how unpowerful monopolies really are, to just jump on this. Oh my God, it's a monopoly on raisins. We have to break it. No, you don't. You don't have to do anything. Nobody gives a shit. It's raisins. Eat some blueberries or something. Eat some dried blueberries. Eat some dried cranberries. Eat some dried bananas. Like, whatever. There, you have so many options. Okay, the other point I wanted to make, yeah, so that's really interesting. As Citizen Alex brought up, with the monopoly, buying up the competition. I think that's brilliant. I think Microsoft is not so much of a software development company as much as it is. I don't know even what you would call it, but there's a name for it. It's a shareholding company at this point. And I think they're really good at it, which is why I bought shares in Microsoft. Guess what? I'm investing in Microsoft. And maybe you should be doing too, because they're really good at what they're doing. I think it's foolish of you and lazy of you to not, research the company and maybe become a shareholder in it or take advantage of what they're doing so damn well. Um, so yeah, buy shares in Microsoft. It's why are you complaining about it instead of admiring what they do and they do so well and become a beneficiary of it. Um, but okay, but so that's one way of treating it. The other thing is that as Citizen Alex brought up, monopolies have political power, and that is a very serious point. And and I do want to address this by very much emphasizing that this is what the International Logic Party and the Agora platform are here to break. It's the way um, the way to address that is by people organizing more effectively to make the government work for the people instead of for just a select few who are, the owners of a particular corporation. I don't think people should be. I kind of meant that half sarcastically that everyone should buy shares in Microsoft. Because Microsoft might be doing that well, but then a few years later some other company might get better at it, and so people are always going to have to buy new shares in this company and this company. Frankly, that's really annoying. I think people should be beneficiaries of being shareholders in their own nation. And basically, what I'm kind of talking about is like a citizen's dividend, what some people might call it, which is essentially the universal basic income. So another really important point, if the people really did control the government instead of the corporations, one of the things we do have to institute is the universal basic income to redistribute um, a lot of the profits that we have from our uh, corporations being so fiercely competitive. Yeah, the corporations are fiercely competitive, they generate a lot of profits, but one way to do that and to prevent that from not going to just a small number of people is to redistribute a lot of that wealth through something like the universal basic income. So, in a way, this, it is something we need. In order to complete the picture, we do need the universal basic income. What I'm saying is, let's not focus on trying to break the monopoly so much, but make the society as a whole more favorable to all its residents, so that yeah, if Microsoft raises the prices on a certain product or whatever, if they have really high prices or they buy out the competition, well, that's okay. I can still afford it. It's not a problem for me. Like, I have other things to worry about. If this business is the only one right now, providing this service, that's fine. I can afford it. I have other things to also think about. Um, so there, as a consumer, I buy products from all kinds of different things that some people might call a monopoly. I use Google. Google, you could say Google is a monopoly. Of course, there are alternatives, but uh, but yeah, I still use Google. I support them. I'm actually thinking about becoming a shareholder in Google, but I don't know if I want to. Maybe. Because they might go away. Eventually there might be a better business that does what they do better. If they become too corrupt, their search results become too skewed, then a competitor will arise and people will switch to that competitor. So I don't know if I actually want to be a shareholder in Google because they might collapse. But the point is it's monopolies are not a problem even with higher prices as long as people can afford those prices. It's just not a problem because yeah, and everybody is freaking about this right now. Oh my God, this in this month, the Google or whatever, the Microsoft is so expensive. Okay, but it's not going to be like that in a year. It's not going to be like that, 5 years from now. I think what people freak out in the moment, but I think people need to have a longer time perspective. All of these things work themselves out in the market. Um, Provided we do other things like effective democracy and things like that. So these things work themselves out, but people just need to not panic in the short term. So that's a really important point. Anyways, I've been talking for long enough. I'm going to yield the floor. We have Citizen Jeff next. You have the floor.
Okay, Zari, there's two particular points that you made I just want to briefly reflect on. One is that I've never heard an argument made that monopolies make it so that a consumer doesn't have an alternate way to get their product. It's not something I've ever heard. As far as I can know, you made earlier, I heard about, if a person's too lazy to find another way to get a product, but monopolies are not referred to that way because a person can't get another way to get a product. That's just not why monopolies are referred to. Nobody says that they can't find another way to get a product, that they can only get it from that company. That's just not an argument that's ever made for why a company is a monopoly. It's not made that way at all. Nobody ever says because that company's a monopoly, I can't get the product any other way. Like digging a well or what have you. I don't see any premise where laziness has something to do with why a person would object to a monopoly. There are creative, resourceful ways that a person can get something that they don't have to buy from that monopoly. But monopoly is not referred to as something where a person can't get a product any other way. It's just not referred to that way. The other thing is that you were saying that, why is it bad for a monopoly to buy another company? I don't see anything wrong with that. And they don't drive away the competition. The thing is, the number one, when a monopoly buys another company that's coming in, they are in effect knocking out the competition. One major point that you've made here is that we can benefit financially from any of this. Absolutely. You can become a shareholder of a company and benefit. You can benefit from a price being lowered. Absolutely. There are a lot of ways that you can benefit financially from what a monopoly does. You're absolutely right about that. But to say that a company can operate in that environment, there are companies that operate in Google's environment. There are companies that operate in Amazon's environment. There are companies that operate in Microsoft's environment. They do now. But the fact is that they do not have nearly the power to operate that those particular companies do. Those companies have the lion's share of power in that market of what they can and can't do. They can make it so that the company that's competing with them can't operate as effectively. They literally can through changes in legislation, through changes in their operating practices. One of the reasons why they remain powerful, this was true of IBM before they stopped innovating and streamlining, but they started to do so again. One of the reasons why these companies stay in power is the simple fact that when another company comes in and starts to operate, they have all kinds of mechanisms to dilute that company's power and effectiveness, all kinds. There's just like all kinds of strategies and ways that they can, mechanisms that they can use to stop that company from competing with them. And they've done so time and time again. So when it comes to other companies can operate in, what's wrong with them having that power? They work very well with it. I've been watching what these companies do for a long time. They don't operate in an atmosphere of competition. They basically don't. Even though you have other companies operating in their arena, it's not really competitive. The company that's in power stays in power. And the other companies that are attempting to compete will take a share of that marketplace, but very little. So I just wanted to reflect on those particular points that they don't actually work when it comes to are monopolies inherently bad. It doesn't deal with the question of whether a consumer can buy a product elsewhere. And it doesn't really pertain to whether a company can operate in their marketplace. Is it the monopoly has retained power because of how they operate? They don't say, okay, we're gonna now compete with you because you're here, or we're gonna buy you because you're here and allow you to operate. they literally tend to continue to run those companies that were competing with them. That's the nature of buying the company for the most part. Sometimes they leave the management in place, but they're still in charge. They basically are. They have a lot of power and a lot of say over what that company does. So there are things to consider in that argument. I'm not saying you're right or wrong in saying this, but there are additional things to consider in that argument.
That's it? Okay. We have Citizen Alex. You have the floor.
All right, Cesare, you said that don't worry about monopolies because eventually they will fail and fall apart. Well, I don't think that happens. If you look at AT&T in 1980, AT&T charged outrageous amount of money for long distance calls, and there was no competition, and that monopoly only ended. There was no innovation either, but that monopoly only ended through legislation. I think, aside of this, I think for me at least, a lot more interesting conversation would be about industries where competition is not possible. And frankly, I'm somewhat in the dark on that. I'd like to understand that better. Examples of that are utilities primarily. You can't have two power companies serving the same area. So you can't have competition. And yet the prices somehow are not through the roof. There's a public utility commission that fills some role. I don't know that you consider that a government institution or government intervention or what. That would be interesting to me and perhaps more constructive to discuss that kind of scenario and perhaps illuminate somewhat also the very nature of monopolies in the general economy. Done.
Thank you. Citizen Avery, you are next. You have the floor.
Thank you. So I guess my sort of comment is that I kind of think that generally speaking, monopolies are kind of, they're not like inherently bad, but I think they tend towards corruption for the most part. I think that they can kill competition to some extent, and they can set prices they can choose. They can supply like inferior products. Like what I mean by that is if you could get a product from, let's say, one company, there's not really incentive, like for example, for smaller businesses to start, because if one business owns the power to produce one product, then what's the incentive for smaller businesses to try to compete against that type of power? I think that that would kill innovation to some extent, and so I don't think that's a good idea in certain contexts. But I think so, like when we're talking about public needs, like water, for example, I think monopolies are bad in those situations. Like I think that I think as Cesare kind of was saying, monopolies can be okay as if people have like power in that monopoly. Like, so when it comes to water, I think water should be like a publicly owned thing. I think it's like a human right. So I think that it should be distributed to the maximum amount of people as possible. So I think when you have a monopoly in a private system, you have a corporation whose goal is to make money. And I think that they would get to choose what prices they would set in a private system, and they would be able to basically control who gets water, because they would control where they would be able to distribute it. If you can only get your water resources from one company, you would have to go to that company. You would have in both location, but also in terms of like on their terms. And so I think that when it comes to something like water, for example, that should be readily distributed as much as possible. So I think that If it was to be publicly owned corporation that distributed it, I think that would help in a lot of ways, because then their goal isn't necessarily profit motivated and it can be controlled by the public to an extent. So I think that that would be better. We could set sort of prices for certain things, like for example, I think like for pills, we could have like a public uh, corporation that basically supplies pills and supplies like pharmaceutical needs and stuff of that nature. And yeah, I just think that monopolies tend to kill democratic processes usually. And I think when we're talking about luxury goods, I think monopolies can be okay, like a laptop or a phone. I don't necessarily think those are justified in the same way as like a need, in the same way like water is, for example. So I think that there are times monopolies is okay, but there are certainly times where I think we should avoid them. That's and yeah, that's my take on that. So I yield the floor.
Thank you. I have my hand up next. I want to try to summarize some of these thoughts and kind of get us ready to maybe to move on to something else, because to me this idea was intended to be educational, but educational towards more practical solutions. Um, so I want to move towards what I think those practical solutions are. Um, so one okay, so one point was raised that monopolies stay in power. They're able to keep their power. Um, like that's a bad thing. Like, okay, why is that a bad thing? What do you mean? Like, why is this a problem? Because I don't think it's actually a problem. Because if a monopoly has a lot of power, they have power can be used for a lot of different things. So I think you actually have to be very specific in why you think it's a problem, because they can use that power to innovate some really cool new technologies so that they can continue to remain a monopoly. Develop new and better products. That's good. If somebody has a lot of power to do that, that's great. Elon Musk has a lot of power. And he's using that power brilliantly. So I love what the man is doing. Uh, Probably he should have more power. Um, Actually, well, that's another point. But my point is that monopolies having a lot of power is not a problem. I think what is a problem is when human quality of life is degraded as a result of that. So, like when you talk about, a privately owned water utility in a town, yeah, that will degrade the human quality of life. That is probably one of the dumbest things that a group of people can do, is let their water be controlled by a private utility. Those things, and as this idea talks about, one of the best uses of a monopoly is in things that where innovation is not really important, and water is not really, water service or whatever it's called, the water utility, it doesn't really require a lot of innovation. It just needs maintenance. Maybe it needs innovation and in administration, but even that is not all that, like, it's not like that fiercely competitive. So, um, so yeah, one of the dumbest things you can do is to make your water supply private. You should keep that public. It is a publicly owned monopoly at that point, and it's a good thing. Everyone is better off. So my point is, what we should be concerned is the human quality of life, because as long as it's possible to have monopolies that have power and growing power, but and at the same time increasing the human quality of life, because maybe they're using that power to innovate to increase the human quality of life. That is the focus. I don't think we should be focused as, just automatically vilifying monopolies and trying to fight them, and like these ghosts, always be on this crusade against these ghosts or whatever, like blindly always like trying to fight monopolies. No, what I think, we need to let the market do what the market does, and we need to focus on how do we actually improve the human quality of life. And one of those things that I think is very much connected is like the idea for the universal basic income. If if the monopolies are fiercely competitive and they are destroying the competition, and that's fine as long as the profits, as long as that wealth is being passed on to the individual residents of a society, and they're able to afford the prices of the innovative monopoly. That's how we solve the problem. That's the real issue here. Is we don't want the power just to be degrading the human quality of life. As long as we have high quality of life, it doesn't really matter if some businesses are monopolies or not. Obviously, like I said, we've already seen this proven over and over that whenever you have water utilities being private, it's basically a recipe to guarantee a degradation of human quality of life. Probably, as I think, who was that? Sorry, I don't remember, but someone else was making the point, like like power utilities. That is another place that can be kind of very similar to water, to the supply of water. So that is another one of those things where it probably is better to have public regulation, um, or maybe even public or public power utilities. Um, but yeah, I just wanted to bring that to people's attention. Let's not confuse monopoly power with degradation of quality of human life, because those things can be addressed very differently, and I think we should be very careful in how we do in that. So, one other point I wanted to make before I yield the floor, and by the way, we do have 9 minutes of the regular discussion time before we move to closing remarks. So, one other thing I want to address, and especially as this relates to Microsoft, like examples like Microsoft, I think we should eliminate intellectual property rights almost completely. I don't want to say about that too much right now, but especially um, especially for things like arts, information based type. Because basically, it's people creating a monopoly, creating an artificial monopoly. Um, Maybe we should have intellectual property rights, basically patents, but not copyrights. I think we should eliminate all copyrights. I think we should maybe keep just patents on certain manufacturing. Um, but because yeah, that's us creating monopolies, and most people don't even think about that. Like, people instinctively think monopolies are so bad, but yeah, sure, let's create all these monopolies by giving all these people exclusive control of intellectual property. It's like look at the disconnect there. Look at the um, look at that. Yeah, that lack of integrity there. Um, so this is another way that I think we can practically solve this problem of monopolies. Well, if they are a problem in whatever way, we shouldn't be creating them intentionally. So that's another point I wanted to bring up. I'm going to yield the floor here. So I'm done. We have 7 minutes till closing remarks. Do we have any other hands up to speak?
Well, I could jump in with some points.
Go ahead, citizen.
Is that
Dan from material.org.
Yes.
You have the floor.
We should all be citizens of civilization. This is our duty, and our civilization work doesn't work without civilized people. And I'm totally for citizen engagement.
I don't know if this is on your end, but your audio is breaking up. It's very staticky. Is anyone else having this problem, or is that just me?
Oh, I've got a foot massager on. Did that help? I turned it off.
I also can't hear what Dan is saying.
I haven't been able to hear any of it at all, actually.
Oh. Okay, well, I pretty much said what I want to say in the comments, so I guess I will beg off due to bad audio.
It hasn't improved any. I don't know if anybody else has improved, but I find that his audio is staying impossible to hear.
Well, I could understand that he said that basically what he wanted to say is in the comments. I could make that out. So, and
In
it
that
might be
case,
good.
in that case, he was saying that monopolies get their money from unearned income. That's the only thing I see in the comments from him.
Right, it might be worth reading for someone to read his comments for people watching the video.
So, Citizen Dan, if you'd like to summarize, maybe copy and paste just so it could be one concise statement so that someone could read it, so we don't have to hunt through all the different comments to read. So I could read that for you if you'd like to make a summary of your points. That's very welcome. Do we have any other speakers while that's taking place? Okay, so while you are all gathering your thoughts, I'm gonna jump in. Um, I do encourage you all to support this idea. I do think it provides a really important perspective into approaching economics in general. I think it's important to see monopolies as not really all that bad. I think what we do have to be careful about is that we get scared. Like FDR said, that the worst thing we have to fear is fear itself, and I think people have this irrational fear of monopolies, like it's this great boogeyman, but it's really not as bad as people's reaction to it. I think that's a much greater concern, because actually, because when people fear, oh my God, we have to eliminate monopolies at all cost. That's when people do really stupid things, and that's when they create certain laws that actually create certain administrations, government administrations that create wasteful spending. You create all these bureaucrats that are supposed to regulate these monopolies, but guess what? Now it's not market forces that are running things, and people's cleverness and in using market forces, but instead it's actually now you have people in positions of power, in monopolistic power, who are then going to use that power to favor certain market actors. So this is where corruption. So through our response to monopolies, people actually introduce corruption into our governance. So I think that's why we have to be very careful with that, and especially especially when people's quality of life is not suffering, especially when people's quality of life is improving, and then to have this response, oh my God, it's a monopoly, we have to regulate it, give all these bureaucrats jobs, let's spend all this money, let's, on all these people who are not really doing anything valuable in response to this false threat. And that's where a society really shoots itself in the foot. That's why I think it's really important to be aware of monopolies not really being as bad as so many people think they are. And to that effect, this is why I think it is important that people support ideas like the universal basic income. If we have the universal basic income, monopolies are not that big of a problem, because so much of the profit, so much of the wealth that would very often go to the select few owners of a monopoly, are now being more distributed throughout the society. And in a sense, at that point, society does become, being a resident of that society becomes more like being a shareholder. Because in a way, as Citizen Lois made a point, when you go into let's say Disney World, right? That's an example where they have really high prices for everything. I don't know how much a bottle of water might cost, $5 or $10. I mean, frankly, it was your fault. It was your idea to go to this place where one company controls everything, and then it's like, yeah, well, you you could not go there, or you could do your research, and before you go into Disney World, well, they're not going to let you bring your water with you, but maybe you just don't go. I mean, like, if it's a problem for you to spend $10 for a bottle of water, why are you doing that to yourself? You deserve everything you get. You know, you deserve these high prices. You submitted yourself to it. You put yourself in that situation. So, but anyway, but the point is so. But yeah, you submit, but you elect, you yourself decide to go to this place, but it's much more difficult, but it's not so much true when people, I mean, yeah, you could say, like, we live in Bensenville, Illinois, and yeah, sure, we chose to live here, but it's not really that so all that easy to uproot your life and move to another municipality. It's like, yeah, if the water or whatever is really expensive here, yeah, sure, you can move somewhere else, but it's not as easy as choosing not to go to Disney World or choosing not to go to some other place where, you know, certain things where they have monopolistic power. But if you have the universal basic income, by living in that place, um, you reap the dividends. So yeah, even if they charge really high prices for something, those profits get redistributed. That wealth gets redistributed right back to you, and you can afford to pay whatever the prices are. So, you know, I don't think we should be afraid of monopolies. I think what we should be afraid of is not supporting the idea for the universal basic income. That is a great way to ruin yourself as a society. I want to yield the floor. I thought I saw a hand up from Citizen Jeff. Do you still want to speak before we move on to closing remarks?
Yeah, just a brief remark. Sorry. One thing that you referred to there was the redistribution of income. Now, if you're referring to through taxation, I don't know if you are or not. This taxation has no relevance at all to the wealthy people that you're referring to who have the monopolies. They do not pay taxes almost at all. They shelter their income, or they find other ways to handle their income. You'll know the wealthiest people that we are familiar with out there, they pay less. They tend to pay less taxes than we do, much less. They tend to pay nothing at all in most cases. So if taxation is an example of redistributing, it would be a false premise because they just don't pay the taxes at all and they have no intention of it.
Okay, so it is time to move into closing remarks. Do we have any volunteers, people who have been with us before and who know how closing remarks go, who would be willing to lead us in closing remarks and calling on people, make sure that everyone gets to speak and no one is being interrupted? Do we have anyone willing to lead us in closing remarks? Okay, I'm not seeing any volunteers, so I will lead. I will speak last as the presenter and as the host. I'll get the last word. Um, looks like we had Tom, who was interested in speaking next. So, Citizen Tom, you have the closing remarks first. You have the floor. And you are muted.
Okay, the idea that monopolies are not inherently bad, I can agree with, because that's so very general. If somebody who owns a monopoly is the most wonderful person in the world, and this is a psychological point, and most altruistic and just cares about the world, they're going to run the company good, well, and fairly. So they won't charge the highest prices. But as we know, in a capitalist system, if you do that, profit maximization is the goal. So if you do that, you won't be a monopoly very long. You'll lose out. The idea, so I support the idea in general, but I don't agree with a lot of your arguments, Cesare. I especially don't agree with the idea that you should turn around and blame the consumer with the consumer is stupid, the consumer is lazy, the consumer is greedy. They want the lowest price. Well, it's in capitalism. The reverse is not true either. the owner is not necessarily greedy. He wants the highest price. He or she has to have that highest price. Profit maximization is the fundamental goal of capitalist society. And by the way, I think you confuse markets and capitalism often and think they're one and the same. They are not. So I will not support the idea in Agora, but I do agree with the general idea that monopolies, and I do agree too with your idea that we shouldn't have a knee-jerk reaction that monopolies are always bad, they're always terrible. But I agree with most of the people who are your detractors here that say monopolies, historically, monopolies tend to be bad and do bad things when they get the power to do it. And so that's about all I have to say about that. I'll let someone else take over.
Okay, thank you. The next person will be Gene, especially since you have your hand up. You have the floor. Citizen Gene, take it away.
Hello, do I have audio? Can you hear me, guys? Okay, thanks. Well, first of all, first time here, and I apologize for not knowing the format. Also joined maybe 40 minutes into the meeting, so I didn't really catch the presentation. But what I want to say is that the topic itself was very interesting, and I wanted to hear some ideas that would, just to see if my personal idea that monopolies are bad, I wanted to see something different. I didn't catch the presentation. I caught some discussion. Unfortunately, I didn't really hear anything that convinced me, or at least give me some, or at least, let's say, open my mind towards how good the monopolies could be. I believe that monopolies, by not having competition, are generally going to be bad to begin with, unless we have some reason to believe otherwise. But, like I said, I was hoping to hear something to really change my mind. I think the competition is a good thing. I think it will drive towards progress, or faster towards progress. But other than that, like I said, unfortunately, I don't have much else to say. I think competition is good. Monopolies are eliminating that. And I still don't find a good reason to believe in monopolies at this point, or at least, start exploring more. But like I said, I apologize for not being here from the very beginning. Thank you. Over.
Thank you. We have Citizen Dan at permatrail.org. Next, you have the floor.
Okay, thanks. Is my audio better? Is it working? Okay, cool. Yeah, it's an important topic because I think all inequality ultimately stems from people monopolizing things they shouldn't be monopolizing, like land and water and sunlight and air. These are all natural resources, and when we let people own them in perpetuity without letting others get access to them, we create just a terrible condition for inequality and coercion and violence. And there was a guy, Henry George. He wrote the most popular book ever in the 1876. It only was matched in sales by the Bible. And his quote was, it's a well-provisioned ship on which we sail through space. And he came up with the idea of not owning land, but just having an annual lease that you pay to use it. So you're actually paying for the location, the right to use that location. And we can use this idea in not just for land, but for other natural resources, because people didn't create natural resources, they shouldn't get to monopolize them, and other people need them for life. So it's actually an act of violence to monopolize any kind of necessity of life, natural resource. There's an excellent plan. Fierce.com is the name of it, which is a updating of the Henry George idea. You can look up Georgism or Geoism on Wikipedia, and it's amazing that these ideas, have been suppressed. Actually, the game Monopoly was created by a student of Henry George. It was originally called the Landlord's Game, and it was designed to teach how bad monopolies in land were. So that's kind of an ironic thing that we're talking about monopoly today. But yeah, the permatrail is kind of a solar system-wide demonopolization of natural resources and a way to encourage humane rights and permaculture. And permaculture is a great design science that you can use for anything. And I'm over there because my phone.
Okay. Thank you, Citizen Dan at permatrail.org. Next, we have Citizen Jeff. You have the floor.
Let's start off by saying that in theory, you have the right premise. That there isn't anything intrinsically wrong with power. There isn't anything intrinsically wrong with monopolies having power and being in control. Because there is the premise that it isn't inherently wrong to have. But then for me, the trail stops there. That, okay, I've been watching what monopolies do for a while now, since back in the 70s. And I've always wanted to see if the next hit company that garners power is going to do what they should. But you know what? They never do. The problem is that there's always infighting. There's always rampant corruption. Every single time. They always, when the company knocks on the door to possibly compete, if they don't drive that company out of business, they take it over. And then they install their own power people in the company. They literally keep their power when they buy the company or when they drive the company out. That's what they do. In theory, they could do otherwise, but it's not. But that's what they do. They don't pay taxes. They provide a value for the customer. You're absolutely right about that. Sometimes they are even keeping the prices low for the customer. But this whole idea of laziness, I don't really understand where you're coming from on that. Because the customer has always had the ability to buy in a different way. Customers, there's always going to be somebody who complains about the way it's handled. Always has been, always will happen. But I don't know why laziness is being introduced there. It's not apparent to me why anybody who has issues with a monopoly is lazy. I just don't get that. Now, the basic problem with monopoly, and I'm thinking in terms of the particular companies that have been brought up here, is each of them, I'm familiar with the people who ran them and how they started their company. I'm well aware of how Bezos got started with Amazon. I'm well aware of how Bill Gates got started with Microsoft, etc. How Google got started by a group of people. I'm well aware of how they got started. And each of them started with an excellent premise. Each of them, when they were developing their roots and getting larger, had an excellent premise. I didn't disagree with the premise for any of those companies when they got larger and built themselves. They were all good companies, every one of them. But somewhere along the way, they start, I don't know if they feel threatened by companies, their potential competitors, if they just don't want to have potential competitors. I do know, the only company I can comment in that regard is Facebook, because the story there is fairly well known. The person who started Facebook, who still does control it, made a point of driving his own competitors away who were working with him. Bezos at Amazon has made a point of amassing power and not redistributing at all. It's just what he makes a point of. And it's been pointed out to him, and he just continues to do it. At Microsoft, it took around 30 years or so before Bill Gates got interested in redistributing. And that was only because all the people around him kept telling him he had to do it. He didn't do it on his own. He did it because he was told he had to. And then he got stripped of part of his titles by a judge. Now, what I'm pointing out here is that none of these people who started the huge companies started off with the premise of driving out competition. None of them start off with the premise of being greedy. None of them start off with the premise of, I'm not going to take care of the customer. They all started off with good premises. Every one of them did. But along the way, they changed. Along the way, they started driving away competitors, including among their own management teams. And along the way, when they could have redistributed and bettered the economy, they did. That's not what they did. The only one who, among those largest companies, who went about redistribution did because after a number of years of hearing complaints from the people he was working with, he decided it was time to start his foundation. Now, the only one that I'm aware of who did anything different was Warren Buffett. It's the only one I'm aware of who actually believed in redistribution and actually did anything besides amass power. The only one I know about. All the others, all of his contemporaries, in amassing power, it was about power. They never paid taxes. They were not about advancing the consumer at all. That only happened because they had to survive. Now, as you said, it's not a bad thing to want to survive and want to innovate, but largely it's all about power when they do what they do. So there's definite pluses to your arguments, but at the same time, there's limitations to those particular arguments that I've offered. I'm going to leave it at that.
Thank you. We have Citizen Yurevich next. You have the floor.
Okay, so in summary, I might support this idea if it had totally different content, because maybe monopolies are not always bad, but I have issues with a lot of the things written, and I find it sort of surprising when I asked whether Cesare considered a situation where someone can get around a monopoly by being very extreme and very creative. He just said, oh, well, people are too lazy to dig their own wells, like not answering the question directly, but just going on and on about lazy consumers. And I find that really odd, because, I mean, that's assuming everyone has the land to dig a well, everyone has the materials, everyone has the equipment, everyone knows how to do it, they have water treatment capability, all of this. I just I'm not really connecting this at this citizen assembly, so sorry. But I am thankful for people's contributions and for people showing up and being thoughtful. I really do appreciate that. So good meeting. Thanks.
We have Citizen Avery next. You have the floor.
Sorry, this is closing remarks. Just to clarify. Oh, okay. Yeah. So I think that I pretty much am in relative agreement with Yurovich, and well, not exactly in the way that I mean, I had enjoyed engaging with everyone, and I definitely think that monopolies are not necessarily inherently bad, but I think that, as I said, they do have a tendency to decentivize I think people from competing, and I think that they can become bad in certain contexts, but I think that no, they're not inherently bad. So I do agree conceptually that they're not inherently bad. And I think, yeah, they do have to point towards, as Cesare said, public good. And, if we all have a stake in these monopolies, then they can be good in that context. So I agree in that regard. But yeah, I think I do support this idea conceptually, but I would have to read the actual post on Agora to comment on whether or not I particularly agree with that or not. But yeah, in theory, I think I do agree with some of the arguments that were posed. And yeah, that's all. I yield the floor. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to go last here. I'm going to try to circle back to. I think I want to earn the nickname "Circle Back." Circle back to Sade. It's kind of a joke. Okay, so Citizen Jeff was making a point about taxes, rich people not paying taxes. I do have an idea in my ideological profile in the main Agora of what's the ideal form of taxation, ideal type of taxation structure would look so that the rich people are paying their fair share. I encourage you to check that out. Recently did just share it with all of my leads in Agora, so you probably got it. Citizen Yurevich, if you don't like the content of this idea, I'd like to see you rewrite it. Maybe this idea does stand to be improved. It would be great to see what you can do with that. I do want to say, just like with all of these ideas, for all of you to keep in mind that it's not easy to write an idea that other people agree with. You do have to have some extent of generosity that, you know what, this is not exactly how you would say it, but if you're not going to rewrite it yourself, it's pretty good to let a decent idea stand and support it, so that other people are aware that at least that the collective consciousness is aware of some of these things. So point is we should be generous as long as like an idea is not like blatantly terrible. We should be generous in supporting them, especially if you're not supporting another idea, because or your profile is not filled with other ideas. Yeah, I had a thought that I missed on that, but what else did I want to say? And it's I think it's really important that we get the message out that these general concepts. I think it really is that people don't just automatically demonize this idea. And the other thing I want to focus your attention towards is that what ultimately I think we need to be focusing on is improving the quality of life of individuals. Ultimately, all of these, our whole tax structure, all of these laws and all of these regulations, why do they exist? They really exist so that, you know, um, humans coming from that basic hunter-gatherer lifestyle, as we got all this complex technology, like all of the purpose of all of this technological innovation, because you could have always just gone to that bush and picked those berries, or hunted that animal. Like, we came from this basic animal state, and where you really had freedom. Oh, and if you really didn't like this person, well, you could have just killed them. I mean, that was a solution. But as we got all this technology, all of these things just, as this technology arose to improve our quality of life, well, then we started creating all of these regulations, which were also intended to improve our quality of life, to actually deal with the technology that came about to improve the quality of life. So I think we really need to never lose sight of that, because that's what it's all about, is maintaining the quality of life. And I think we should keep our markets fiercely competitive, including letting monopolies, be as they are. If they're good at it, if they're really good at it, then they probably deserve to be a monopoly for some time until they get taken down. And especially if you have a high quality of life where people can afford basic necessities and things like that, and they can afford the spare time on the weekends to work on upstarting a new company that is going to displace the monopoly, then that's the real success. Like, people need the free time in order to innovate in their garage or whatever, in their studios, so that they can enter the market with a new competitive product that's going to break the monopoly. So I think that that's what we have to keep in mind is, let the market be fierce, but let people have their own uh, needs for survival so they can fiercely compete in that market. And when they fall, they have the ability to get back up again and re-engage. That's what drives market competition. Um, I think that's all I have for my closing remarks. One last thing I want to say about that is, I do make myself available in my citizen office hours to discuss these ideas one on one. I keep my citizen office hours from 5 to 6 and 6 to 7 Central Time, on Sundays. So that's today. You will be able to find my citizen office hours in my ideological profile. There's a link to RSVP to a meetup group through that. And so, and I also encourage all of you to have your own citizen office hours, because frankly, the best way to discuss these ideas is really one on one. I think having these meetings is a great opportunity to hear diverse points of view, but to really get in depth on some of these topics and to how they relate to other issues. You really need some one on one time for that. So I encourage you to have your own citizen office hours. Um, and yeah, that's so I'm done with my closing remarks. We are 6 minutes past 2 hours. The last thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna um, do a vote for who had the most insightful contribution. I must say, the prize, which is one of these beautiful T-shirts, you can only get this T-shirt once. For those who win a second time with the most insightful contribution, you will become a shareholder in Igora. So for those of you who will be winning it a second time, if you should happen to do that, that's the alternative prize. So if you would all take 1 to 2 minutes in the chat. We use approval voting, so you can write multiple names of people. You don't just have to keep it limited to one. Um, so yeah, write the names of who you thought had the most insightful contribution, and we'll be awarding it later. And just as a reminder, after this, we're done here, officially done here. We will be hanging out a little bit. The room is going to stay open. The room is going to stay open for socializing, for connecting. I do want to address some points that people made more casually. I'm trying to think of who had the most insightful contribution. Dan at permatrail.org, you are messaging to me privately. Please keep it all public so that we can check each other's work and make sure that whoever won, in fact, won. Yes, you can vote for yourself. There's no restriction to who you can vote for. Okay, we have. All right, so I'm going to start tallying the votes here. We have 2 votes for Alex. We have 2 votes for Tom. And was there another?
And 2 votes for Dan.
2 votes for Dan? Okay. Yeah, oh yeah, that's true. Yes, thank you. We need a tiebreaker. Do we have something that's going to break the tie here?
Well,
Isn't that two and a
It's
half
a-
votes for Alex?
well, it looks like it's might be between Avery and Alex, since Tom's vote has Dan as an honorable mention.
Oh. Oh yeah. Right. I'd go with a tie between Avery and Alex. So since Alex is not here, Avery's the winner. You got to stick around to win the prize. I mean, not necessarily, I suppose, but it makes sense.
But absent people have won before. But I think
Sure,
it
right.
makes, I think, like, if you're gonna have to break a tie, like the person who stayed, I can see, how that would make sense, that would be the tiebreaker.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, congratulations, Citizen Avery.
I mean, we could do a recall, I guess, if anyone wanted to, but otherwise, yeah, I'm happy to take that.
Well, fantastic. All right, so you and I, we're gonna have to coordinate how I can get this to you. So, control your government.
Well, I mean, what is the prize exactly? Sorry.
It's the T-shirt.
Oh, okay.
Control your government T-shirt.
Yeah. So like, if you needed information, I could just write it in chat, perhaps. That could be a solution.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, you know what? Let's. Can you give me your email, please?
Sure. So it's just
and I'll give you my email just in case.
yeah, no problem. So it's averygoslin@gmail.com. So my first name's on screen, but my last name is spelled Goslin.
Can you write it in the chat, please?
Sorry, could I write it? Yeah.
Right. Oh, and there goes Gene. Oh, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
I'm gonna send them. Okay, and so this meeting is officially over.
Right.
Everyone now knows the email address.